Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. My dear King, O Protector of the citizens, henceforward be very careful to execute my orders and not be misled by anything. Anyone who lives in that way, simply carrying out my orders faithfully, will always find good fortune all over the world. Purport. The sum and substance of religious life is to execute the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one who does so is perfectly religious. In Bhagavad Gita 18:65, the Supreme Lord Krishna says, Manmana bhava madbhakta, just think of me always and become my devotee. Furthermore, the Lord says, Sarva dharman parityaja, mammikam sharanam vraja. Give up all kinds of material engagement and simply surrender unto me. Bhagavad Gita 18:66. This is the primary principle of religion. Anyone who directly executes such an order from the personality of Godhead is actually a religious person. Others are described as pretenders, for there are many activities going on throughout the world in the name of religion which are not actually religious. For one who executes the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, there is only good fortune throughout the world. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svabarantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vagishayasya vadhane, Lakshmiryasya chavakshasi, Yasya te hridaye samvit, Tam narasimham aham bhaje, Pralada hridayaladam, Bhaktavitya vidaram, Sharatinduruchim vande, Pavindra vandanam harim. My dear King, O Protector of the citizens, henceforward be very careful to execute my orders and not be misled by anything. Anyone who lives in that way, simply carrying out my orders faithfully, will always find good fortune all over the world. In this purport, Srila Prabhupada very strongly defines what is religion, and we have a very strong stance on that because Srila Prabhupada very clearly distinguishes religious from irreligious life and activity by clear standards given in Shastra. You will find, particularly if you are active maybe in interreligious dialogue, that there are very different views on what is religion, what it can be. Most people, if it's even still accurate to say most people, would assume religion has to do with an idea or belief in a God. But for many people, religion doesn't even need to mean that. It can be a type of faith or belief, even atheistic faith, like many, isms like Taoism, Buddhism, and so on. So they would be categorized as religion, although those who have a theistic worldview would not agree that this is religion. Also an understanding of the word religion, religare, like in terms of connecting, reconnecting, is understood to mean a personal God that you reconnect with. Of course, you can also reconnect with the one absolute truth. So, but the Vedic version is as we have it, as the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as we have it, is a clearly theistic stance to things. Over and over again, the very term, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is right in your face saying it's a person, it's a Supreme Person, and not just the divine, or, these terms might be used sometimes also in Upanishads. The Upanishadic language is often also apparently impersonal, although it depends a bit on the person who looks at the Sanskrit and so on, because it addresses the whole subject a bit more abstract, not necessarily in this very specific bhakti way. So in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, also right at the beginning, clearly defines what it will do in terms of religion, what will be the content that can be expected. And in the second shloka of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, we find, I tried to read the first, also Sanskrit, and just like plain, Dharma prochita kaitavo traparamo nirmatsaranam satam. It's the first line of this verse. Dharma, right in the beginning, religious, or it's translated as religiosity. Prochita, completely rejected. Kaitava, covered by fruitive intention. So in the translation goes, completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. And a very significant sentence, the highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. And so then it claimed that this beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. So religion in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam means clearly a purely transcendental approach to existence itself, to the Lord. And Kaitava Dharma, or like cheating religion, is defined by material motives. That religious activity that aims at me at ending up with having sense gratification, as we would say, or position in the world, or like a separate existence of God, would be categorized as cheating religion. Because it does not convey the essential nature of the self in a sense of leading the person to the transcendental understanding of you are an eternal servant of the Lord, a transcendental soul, and your position is to be in a loving relationship with Him on a transcendental platform. And as we heard that there may be religious systems that actually don't acknowledge a God or a personal God, what to speak of establishing a relationship with Him. So we can say, of course, if you look at it in terms of sattva guna, that there are principles that might be favorable for a higher consciousness, like purity, austerity, and compassion, all those things. These are certainly valuable. Srila Prabhupada, though, used to make this very simple equation. He said he put the zeros, like it's also a number, but it only gets value if like at least a 1 is in front of all the zeros. So otherwise the good qualities. And defining the 1 as being Krishna conscious or God conscious, in a sense that we acknowledge the Supreme Person and use our abilities to connect with Him, then all the other qualities become a very ornamental aspect of ourselves. Because you can have like a lot of good qualities and be materialist, and so like at the end spiritually the qualities have not so much value. So here in this verse, Vishnu is speaking, or Maitreya is narrating how Vishnu, again, after King Prithu was offering prayers to Lord Vishnu, is highlighting what he's supposed to do. One of the great questions in philosophy is, what shall I do? And here Vishnu says, follow my orders, which again relate to, of course, where do we get the orders from? We don't talk to Vishnu in the heart, so we accept Shastra as an authoritative source. We know that there is Shruti and Smriti. Anyone would like to distinguish the two? What is Shruti? What is Smriti?
Shruti is what is heard. Text. Smriti is stories.
Well, yeah, it also is. Yeah, it also the Puranas, for example, Smritis. And yeah, Shruti, what is heard, It relates to the original Vedas. The original 4 Vedas are considered Shruti, and they are apaurushaya. They are not from a material source. They have no author. Vyasadeva, the very name Vyasadeva means compiler. He's not the author of the Vedas, he compiled them, but he didn't claim authorship. The Vedanta Sutra, he wrote as a comment. Also the Mahabharata, he wrote. Means also he wrote the Bhagavad Gita, which is considered Smriti. Smriti from remembrance means the realizations of great sages and personalities based on Shruti. And it said the original Vedas, they are not supposed to be heard by Shudras. It's a big offense. And the person who shares with the Shudra and the Shudra themselves, they go to hell for that. So very careful. So, and therefore the Smriti is there. It is like more explanatory literature, or like, how to say, expanding or purporting the Shruti. And even Bhagavad Gita is a Smriti. It's a scripture where Krishna speaks, of course, but it's given by the sage Vyasadeva and also written. Originally, Vedic tradition is like by hearing and receiving and memorizing, therefore Smriti, and writing is the sages, they would look down probably back then if you would have to write down things, not to memorize, because you are supposed to have such capacity of memory that you can just have it like this. So our sources of knowledge are the Smritis in the first place, because it's the scriptures that we hear from. We don't study the original Vedas. We wouldn't be able to understand. So we have the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and so on. And there Krishna gives instructions how to fulfill his orders. And here in the purport, the famous verse Manmana Bhava Bhakta is mentioned in 1865, and I would like to read a bit of the purport. The verse goes, "Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend." The most confidential part of knowledge is that one should become a pure devotee of Krishna and always think of him and act for him. One should not become an official meditator. Life should be so molded that one will always have the chance to think of Krishna. One should always act in such a way that all his daily activities are in connection with Krishna. He should arrange his life in such a way that throughout the 24 hours he cannot but think of Krishna. And the Lord's promise is that anyone who is in such pure Krishna consciousness will certainly return to the abode of Krishna, where he will be engaged in the association of Krishna face to face. This most confidential part of knowledge is spoken to Arjuna because he is the dear friend of Krishna. Everyone who follows the path of Arjuna can become a dear friend to Krishna and obtain the same perfection as Arjuna. The words stress that one should concentrate his mind upon Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada is very explicit on the daily life of a devotee. Like he clearly says, life should be molded in a way that always smaranam, or memory of Krishna, is possible. Manmana bhava bhakto. Mana is the mind, and think of me. Also Arjuna, from this we could go in so many directions. Arjuna himself asks, like, how should I think of you in the Bhagavad Gita? And then Krishna speaks of his vibhutis, the opulences. How can I remember you indirectly, so to speak, in the material world? And then there's so many items that can be done. And we have these processes of bhakti that are leading us to the effect that our mind becomes filled with Krishna. Beginning with Shravanam Kirtanam, what we just do right now, we read and hear scripture, that also vandanam, or prayer, might it be reciting prayers or even write prayers yourself, where you need to recollect memory, where you have to concentrate on your own thoughts and viewpoints on Krishna and connect those with Krishna in a very personal way. Speak to God within your mind. And something that is nowadays it is encouraged a lot because there's always need for encouragement, because many things that are good still need to be encouraged because we might have so many disturbances, distractions, or limitations, and that is the reading of books. Also Prabhu is doing books are the basis, interviews, and there are like talks about it, programs. I remember also back then, we like a few years ago in the temple, we used also to read in the morning quotes of Srila Prabhupada to speak about reading books and to make time for reading books, because this is one of the most powerful methods to manmana bhavamat bhakto, to engage the mind in thinking of Krishna. Also each Thursday it's still going on, like the Krishna book reading and stuff, like so many devotees anyway already gather and simply to read, because this is filling your mind with Krishna. And there's an interesting in the early 80s when the movement was started. Although there was a lot of enthusiasm about book distribution, there was not so much enthusiasm about book reading. And Srila Prabhupada had to point out in many ways, wait, you should really study those books. In the first place, I wrote them for you. Not just you passing it on to others. No, you should be very conversant with those books, because if you want to be a preacher, you have to understand the philosophy properly. You should be competent to answer questions. Clear your own doubts, and but even more, represent properly what is in these books, and not just have some concoctions going on and say, yeah, this is in this book, and then it's not at all in this book. So there's so many aspects of it, and I would like to share a few things. It's a book from Srila Das Goswami. He at that time wrote it, and according to the foreword, you can understand he had faced it means opposition, but he became almost even like somewhat of a controversial figure because of that. Because of stressing the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. Which is, when you look backward, probably you might laugh about it, but back then it was a serious thing. Why? Why introduce that now too much? And one thing why the reading is so important, that we can follow this order of the Lord, is because our time is limited. We are supposed to have a sense of urgency. And this is like, in the beginning he also uses this quote. It's a lecture of Srila Prabhupada in June 1972, where he says, "We should be more serious than Maharaj Parikshit. Parikshit Maharaj had at least some time to live, 7 days. But we do not know whether we will live for even 7 more minutes. At any moment your heart can fail you. You do not know. It may happen when you are going through the street, just like the 2 boys who were coming here. They did not know that they were going to be killed. Our life is so jeopardized. At any moment I can die. That's a fact." So Parikshit Maharaj had the opportunity of hearing Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam for 7 days. But I do not know if I have the opportunity to read Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam for 7 minutes. So let me read it very seriously. That should be our attitude. Not that, oh, Parikshit Maharaj was given 7 days. No, 7 days notice. I have no such notice. I may live for 7 millions of years. That is our disease, Prabhupada says. So, sense of urgency. And even if you live long in this life, if you don't use it for cultivation of transcendental knowledge, this is the greatest loss. And one aspect of it is to absorb in Shastra. It's not saying that you're supposed to become an intellectual. It means engaging the mind in hearing Krishna Katha. There's so many literature. There are highly philosophical texts like the Upanishads, but then there's like Krishna book and like the pastimes, the Leela, and other books that address different parts of the whole Krishna conscious culture and philosophy. And in the introduction, he calls it the awful truth, which is maybe, I don't know, it might be to some degree still a fact today, because many things not necessarily change, they have to be maintained in order that they don't regress to states that have been there before. Like we can never speak a lot about chanting japa or doing kirtan, because there might be tendency to things might go in the background, although they should be in the foreground. So here from back then, let's have in mind it's 1984 when this book came out, but still, how many devotees in the Krishna consciousness movement do not regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books? The answer is too many. There are various reasons for not reading, but the conclusion is always an unfortunate one. The awful truth is often kept a secret or admitted only reluctantly. The temple president admits that he spares very little time, even on a weekly basis, to look through Prabhupada's books. And even when he sets aside some time, he finds it difficult to read attentively. A Sankirtan leader says that when he opens Prabhupada's books, his mind reels with a million distracting thoughts. Which is interesting. An artist who paints pictures of Krishna Lila admits that he has never read the entire Bhagavad Gita, although he has been initiated devotee for 5 years. Quote, I hate to admit it, but I find the books boring. I sleep whenever I try to read. I have no time. Statements such as these are all too common, and they reveal some of the prevalent maladies. Some devotees with poor reading habits make a kind of half-hearted defense. They view their lack philanthropically, saying that at least they are helping others to read the books by distributing them or by working to help maintain the Krishna consciousness movement. Others are complacent about their reading shortcomings or are simply unaware of the importance of reading every day. But the awful truth is that most of us need to reform our reading habits. It is to this end that we offer the present book. And then here's a quote of Srila Prabhupada. All of the devotees connected with this Krishna consciousness movement must read all of the books that have been translated, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal blissful life of transcendental pleasure. And of course, this book is full of statements where Srila Prabhupada stresses the importance of having reading as a part of one's sadhana. And of course, it doesn't mean only devotees who live in a temple. No? It means devotees per se, in different life circumstances, and we might have different challenges. A job we have that might be very time-consuming, a family, services, even the temple. We know how it is. There's always, there's no end. It's an eternal, a nitya lila with the services to be done, and it's a struggle to times to make time or to also create enthusiasm to read. You can maybe silently. You don't have to raise your hand. Quote like rate yourself, how eager are you to read on a scale of 1 to 10? Srila Prabhupada addressed also the leaders especially. I want you leaders especially to become absorbed in the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, and become yourselves completely convinced and free from all doubt. That's one benefit of reading. Strengthen your faith, become convinced, free from all doubt, by discussing, by looking from different angles of view, etc., etc. From not reading, there's also this cannot happen. On this platform, you shall be able to carry on the work satisfactorily, but if there is a lack of knowledge, or if there is forgetfulness, everything will be spoiled in time. So especially you must encourage the students to read our books throughout the day as much as possible and give them all good advice how to understand the books and inspire them to study the things from every point of view. Better to boil the milk very rigorously and make it thick and sweet. That is the best progress. So let us concentrate on training our devotees very thoroughly in the knowledge of Krishna consciousness from our books, from tapes, by discussing always and in so many ways instruct them in the right propositions. It's from a letter in 1972 to Hangsadutta. So this is one of the aspects of Krishna consciousness that is connected with this order of the Lord, because the verse is pointing out like where Vishnu is stressing that one should follow the orders of the Lord in this way, attain all good fortune. He says here, anyone who lives in that way, simply carrying out my orders faithfully, will always find good fortune all over the world. Because also, of course, if you read a lot, naturally at some point you want to talk about it. You know, who piles up loads of information and just keeps it for himself? There are some people who are satisfied with, I'm a reader for myself and read. But many might also feel like, oh, I read that, let me talk, you know, and then you naturally share, maybe, what do you think of that? And have you read this? You know, something like that. So it provides, like has the blog, food for thought. You know, you have to feed our minds. Right? Otherwise, if our mind is starving, it's not so good, and then he will just eat things that he's not supposed to eat too much. Because another thing that may come from reading is writing. And also Srila Prabhupada encouraged writing a lot. Of course, his mood is preaching. He says, I want people not just to understand the knowledge, I want people to be competent to transmit this knowledge to others, so that they might also become conversant with this knowledge and apply this knowledge, in one word, become Krishna conscious and live Krishna consciousness. You know, but we need to understand what it is. Otherwise, how will you be able to live it? Doesn't mean that you're perfectly able to live up to everything that is said there, but it's about understanding in the first place what is the message of the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita. And writing is a powerful cognitive process, because you have to collect your information in the mind, you have to filter and find words for things that might be simply impressions at a given moment, feelings, thoughts, experiences. And you have to kind of get them into a shape so that others can understand what's going on for you. That's a very meditative process, actually. Anyone who writes, might it be an article, a blog, or even a book, you will know you go over and over and over through the text. Right? Not just in terms of grammar, like is everything in the right place, but also content-wise, structure, chronology, but then also philosophically. Did I really, Jagannath Baladev Subhachadevi ki jai, Shishikonitai ki jai, did I really convey the point I wanted to convey? Or is that really conclusive, or are there open questions? You know, and so in this way you get into a process of checking always with yourself, where do I stand with my understanding? And sometimes you might find, okay, I have to read that up again. No, and then we begin with the reading. So writing is a very good, they give hands to each other. So that's also something that's very much encouraged. Particularly, Srila Prabhupada said the sannyasis should write books because they're supposed to be preachers. But it can also, of course, in general, if you're someone who has capacity and ability, it's about writing. Might it be an article, you know, or like brochures, or a blog, or a book. So in this way, your mind is engaged. Of course, there are like other ways. For example, the prayer, as I mentioned it. Also, I mean, today we will have also a little writing workshop where it's about practicing to write prayers yourself using some poetic, techniques, you know, and in this way engage your mind in Krishna, because we know each of the process, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Vandanam, etc. Essentially, each of these processes in itself is capable to lead you to perfection. You know, and there are different personalities listed that attained perfection through that process. Shravanam and Kirtanam, we know Parikshit Maharaj and Shukadev Goswami, they were that, and Vishnu Smaranam. No, I don't know who was the personality listed for having attained perfection by memory. Was it Prahlad? Yeah. And for the Vandanam, for the prayers, was it Akura? Yes. So, yeah. So all those processes are there for us, and we just have to take them up. That's all. You see, sometimes Prabhupada, like in many ways, sometimes we might fully agree, say, yeah, saying, what's the difficulty? And some stuff where I would find, well, yeah, that would be a great difficulty for me, but in terms of preaching, going to like whatever country, like whatever. But in small things, like, yeah, what's the difficulty, you know? To pick up a book and read or talk about it or try to write something, and in this way, always think of Krishna, manmana bhava bhakta. Yes. Any comments or questions, sharings? Shall we use the microphones?
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for stressing the point of reading. Books are the basis. I find it's also, I like the way you present it, because you made clear that reading this swadhyaya, this study of scriptures, is not at the first place like an intellectual exercise, but it is about remembering Krishna, and it's part of the devotional service. I think that's a very important point. And I think there also comes the maybe opposition, or some people who don't like if it's too much stressed, because they feel like, why there's so much stress on reading, this is intellectual, and it's all about bhakti, and why emphasizing this part. And not everyone is a brahmana, and not everyone is intellectual, and so that kind of is there. And I mean, one point is, first of all, Srila Prabhupada really wanted to create brahmanas. So the idea is that, yes, even if you're not maybe so brahmanically inclined, but the whole Krishna conscious movement is meant to elevate people to become more brahmanical, and reading certainly is a part of it. And the other point is that, as you mentioned, it's about being in touch with Krishna, remembering Krishna, and also with Prabhupada, like reading Prabhupada's books. If you read his books, then his purpose, and this is a way to associate with Prabhupada, and that everyone, should do. And of course, maybe you're not able to read 1 or 2 hours, but no one can say that he doesn't have 5 minutes, 10, 15 minutes to read a book. Everyone has that time, and then it's more a question of making priorities. I just, because we have this nectar drops, like every day we publish a short video, a statement from these longer videos that we have. We have these in-depth interviews, which goes an hour, and then we collect some powerful statements and publish every day such an inspirational statement. And then Kalakanta Prabhu from North America, he shared a nice story that some people say, well, if I read, I can't remember anything, and I'm not intellectual, so why should I read? It's kind of better I just wash pots or do some practical service. No, reading is not meant. So he tells a story of that a guru asked, or a brahman asked someone to that was the kind of the argument, and then the person said, well, just bring me a basket full of water tomorrow. And the person had a basket of water, and then tried, and then brought the wet basket. But I tried, but the water got lost. Yeah, but now you have a clean basket at least. And the idea is that even if you don't hold all the knowledge that we read, but the reading process itself is actually purifying. So, because it's part of devotional service, just to hear and remember Krishna. So, anyway, just wanted to share.
Maybe also in this regard, we can say that since there is such a variety of topics and relevant topics, to also maybe filter which topics are most relevant for me at my present life situation, spiritual life. I don't have to study Vedic cosmology if perhaps I'm busy with like getting my life in order practically in terms of finding my profession, whatever. So there also selective reading what makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask. Like I have the problem. I like reading.
You have the problem. You like reading.
I like reading, but my problem is, for example, I can read unending. I can read books of devotees of Prabhupada, or biographies, stories like that. It's really inspiring. But with the Bhagavatam, it's difficult because I like philosophy, but I struggle with, I don't know, keeping my mind on a story of Krishna, for example, or and this is what it's all about, right? So it feels like I feel like purpose is defeated often, and I just wonder what is your advice, or how to progress from this. Still we have to read it, and I want to read it. It's not that, but.
Two things come to my mind. One is what Rupa Goswami says, it can be applied to devotional service per se, because he in fact does apply to devotional service per se. Utsahan nishchayata yiryat, patience and confidence to continue with enthusiasm to try to read it, because out of habit comes also ability. The more your mind is trained to read it, if you say, okay, give it at least 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes reading, whatever sticks, and then would be one thing. Because my experience in the beginning also with Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, many years ago, was that what put me off was that I felt I don't arrive at the actual topic that is presented as the chapter title. And I was thinking, oh cool, material creation, for example. And then, whatever such and such personality offered prayers. First verse, second word. There were 10 verses or something, and I was wondering, what was the chapter actually? Is this the content? Because I was not used to this whole kind of setting or framework. And later on, it just got to me. In the prayers already, there's also something, or information, and it is also the process approaching the Lord through that. And then, because we usually we expect, if I want to have this topic, I open it here, and there it is right there for me to take. But it's a different culture of knowledge, how it is being transmitted and so on. So it took me a while to get familiar with that, and I think it's all about adjustment of the mind to say, okay, I'm accustomed to this type of knowledge acquiring. So kind of affirm to your mind, okay, I'm open to enter Bhagavatam in its own way, how it is what the Bhagavatam requires for me, not what do I require from the Bhagavatam, to make a shift of perspective or paradigm. Because you often have that, the sentence, what do I want from the Bhagavatam? We can also ask the other way, what does the Bhagavatam want from me? In terms of what does it want to tell me and how is it structured, and and stick with it. Something what I do a lot is I listen a lot of Srila Prabhupada's classes, also on the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, and now I listened a lot to Gopi Pranadana Prabhu's seminars and lectures also, which also, for me the terminology is often very interesting. If I get more of a sense of certain words and see, now it's mentioned here again and explained there again, so I can connect it. And maybe even send a little prayer to Krishna to help focus your mind, or enabling your mind to. Because Srila Prabhupada sometimes said it, especially like that, and someone in a lecture also mentioned it, we should relish Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. It's not like a hard work study Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. No, actually we're supposed to relish the hearing of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And it requires, the mind needs to be accustomed to to the culture of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. I don't know if this is helpful for you.
Many devotees I met, they, when I just ask in a conversation, so what are you reading currently? And they say, I don't read, but I like hearing. They say, I like listening. They kind of replace it totally, the reading with the hearing process. So I cannot relate to this myself. I like reading Prabhupada's books, but there are some people whose nature is just, it's not their thing, reading. And I also in the street, while distributing books, so many people, I don't read. So how do you would comment replacing it with hearing?
Well, it's also a reality. Not everyone is a reader type. Like not everyone is a priest. Not everyone is into rituals. Not everyone likes cooking, so we have different types of people, different nature. And maybe it's about also breaking down the reading into different, as we said before, different categories. Like they're different readers, as you said, like some read biographies, where if it's about like a bit more complex philosophy, that feels different. So, but both can be very Krishna conscious. So maybe it's also about finding your topics or types of knowledge that your mind feels most attracted to, which is within the framework of Krishna consciousness, and one way is to go where is your mind naturally inspired. Another way to go is to, as we said before, accustom your mind or try to train it to also, read other things and try to put your mind like. There's this interesting phrase like wrap your head around it. I always like this. If I try to imagine it, like how do you wrap your head around something? But it's kind of an interesting image. And well, yeah, it's also a fact. Not everyone is an intellectual. If you look at it from the intellectual point of view, and we don't have to try to change that because we won't. It's just. But as we said before, it's not about becoming intellectual. It's more about feeding your mind with Krishna. And hearing is a powerful process itself also. Yeah, why not? But I guess most of these people who, let's say one book everyone reads maybe too much is the Facebook, right? And maybe reading a bit less of Facebook and and read Prabhupada's books.
You lie on the street. You read.
I mean, one thing that always works, if someone is enthused about something and shares, it's likely that also others get enthused, like with everything, like with kirtan, like with service. So maybe share, like if you want others to read, maybe also share about or like speak about those things that you're enthused to read, and perhaps let some spark comes over, and yeah, or sit and read together. That's always something. Sometimes it's a social aspect as well. Some people maybe would figure out, I like to read in association, but if I'm alone, I'm not interested. But maybe it feels different if I sit with 1, 2, 3 people and we read together. Whereas others might find, no, I need to read alone. I don't like to, So it could also be a part. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
May I add something more?
Yeah, please.
Janaka Pandit says, travel in 3, read 2 and eat alone.
Uh-huh.
So that reading in like with a body, like a reading body or a friend, is very much recommended. And I think it's also a question of culture. I remember once I was in Vrindavan visiting a devotee. He was invited for a dinner. So we sat there, we ate something, and then all of a sudden he took the book. So let's read. And for him it was completely normal, and I never experienced that. It was some time ago, and I'm like, so now let's read. And then we just read Chaitanya Charitamrita together. Mm-hmm. But it was so nice experience. And sometimes devotees come together and we just spend the whole evening and just talking. but it's a question of culture. Why not just okay? Now we have spoken for 2 hours. Let's read half an hour Prabhupada's books, and it creates such a nice atmosphere. And then afterwards, you have more, thoughts to think about and to speak about what you just heard and read.
Yeah, it's just about getting accustomed. Yeah, we maybe just not used to it, and it's just not. And then, but sometimes, that's just a good thing. We need someone to, interrupt our habit. Jai. All right. Granted, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.